Three teenage girls from the Spanish town of Alcasser went missing without a trace in November 1993. For months, authorities relied solely on shaky eyewitness accounts. However, evidence from the crime scene led authorities to the men who killed the girls. Or apparently killed them. Welcome to Bad Things, and our video on a particularly brutal and mind-boggling case. The murders of the Alcasser girls. As always, Bad Things is looking for what most likely happened in this strange and contradictory case. For those of you who are suspicious, our story begins on Friday, the 13th of November, 1992. Antonio Gomez Rodriguez was born in Valencia, Spain, on May 25, 1977. Tony, as she preferred to be called, was a shy girl. Her friends and family remember her being a nervous but caring and compassionate girl. By 1992, Tony had finished school and was looking for work. Maria Deseada Hernandez Falk, or Desiree, was born in 1978. Growing up, Desiree excelled in any athletic pursuits she undertook. Desiree, according to many who knew her, had a strong personality that was both fun-loving and stubborn. Miriam Garcia Iborra was born in 1978. As she grew up, Miriam gained a reputation for her beautiful looks. Her light brown hair and blue eyes drew the attention of many boys in her class. These three girls, born in Valencia and raised in the little village of Alcasser, would become firm friends. On Friday, the 13th of November 1992, Desiree and Miriam had been in school all day, while Tony spent the afternoon with another classmate, Esther. Eventually, all of the friends gathered at Esther's house. Esther was sick with the flu, but the other three girls were planning to go to a party in Alcasser, a nearby town, at a nightclub called Cooler. The girls left Esther's house at 8 o'clock that evening, with many eyewitnesses seeing them on their way to the nightclub. According to family members, the girls did not have any money to spend at the club or have pre-purchased tickets to attend the party. Francisco Soria, a friend of the girls, apparently saw them earlier in the evening, near to the time they left Esther's home. During his short conversation with the girls, he inquired if they were going to the party at the Cooler Club that evening. According to his subsequent testimony, they said they weren't. Around 8:15 p.m. that evening, another acquaintance remembered seeing them sitting on the pavement a few streets away. The boy wasn't close friends with the girls, but he was friendly and offered to take them anywhere they wanted to go. The three girls, who seemed to be hitchhiking, told him that they were going to the Cooler nightclub. He later testified that he dropped the girls off at an auto repair shop near the club. The most disturbing eyewitness evidence came from a woman who didn't know the girls and came forward just a few days after the girls were reported missing. Maria Badal Soria noticed the three girls strolling past her Alcasser house at about 8 p.m. Soria remembers watching the girls get into a tiny white four-door car, even though they were just a few minutes away from their supposed destination. She remembered seeing at least 3 or 4 males in the white car. According to her testimony, 7 people were in the car when it vanished down the street. Nobody would ever see the girls alive again. When the girls failed to come home that evening, their parents became concerned. These parents, who knew one another through their daughters' friendships, met up the following day. That evening at 9:30 p.m. on November 14th, the parents went to their local civil guard, Spain's equivalent of a national police force unit, in Alcasser. They reported the girls missing, but formal searches did not begin until a few days later. By Monday morning, November 16th, the three girls had yet to come home. The investigation. From the outset, it was assumed that the girls had been kidnapped. Over the following week, the authorities interrogated the three girls' friends and family in the hopes of finding clues to their whereabouts. After media got involved, and despite getting tips from all over Spain, the civil guard was still no closer to finding the three girls than when they first started. A specialized task force was quickly formed as a collaboration between the civil guard and the national police. The task force was known as the Unit of Central Operations and would be headquartered in Valencia. The search for the girls stretched to adjacent countries and even continents. The case was reported to Interpol, which started adding surrounding European and African nations to its list of prospective locations to where the girls might be. But investigators didn't need to go that far. On January 27, 1993, two amateur beekeepers, Gabriel Gonzalez and Jose Sala, were on their way to check their hives on Sala's property in the little village of La Romana, 150 kilometers from Picassent. They decided to let the sun warm up before approaching the hives, which were situated near the remains of an old abandoned house. Gonzalez wandered around the adjacent area for around 20 minutes, entering the abandoned structure. This is when something shiny captured his attention. Yelling to Sala to come and look, the two discovered a loose collection of branches and plants that had been haphazardly thrown over a ditch. Sala peeled back the twigs to examine what was hidden below. He discovered a large watch sticking out from the ground. Sala also discovered that the watch was attached to a person. What Sala and Gonzalez unearthed that day in La Romana would shock Spain to the core. The Alcasser girls had been found. From the get-go, the handling of the bodies was marred by police incompetence. It took the local magistrate several hours to make it to the crime scene. The body excavation, which occurred without the supervision of the UCO task force, would be so badly bungled that it would derail the investigation forever. The crime scene was only locked down hours after the discovery of the bodies, allowing the integrity of the scene to be compromised. The excavation of the scene was done almost immediately. Nobody at the crime scene took photos of the area or completed an exhaustive search before digging the bodies out of the pit. When the bodies were pulled out of the pit, the police discovered that they had been wrapped up in a large rug. Two of the girls had been decapitated, and their hands were bound by a black rope. Along with the bodies, several items were discovered inside the pit, such as unrelated pieces of clothing, bits of rope, and pieces of paper. Police took photos of these individual items after pulling them out of the pit, just like they did with the bodies. These items were assorted afterward and photographed together. A few pieces were just left behind at the scene. After finding the girls' remains, police, who had been looking for them for more than 3 months, were now on track to find any potential suspects. Much of the physical evidence was junk. However, investigators discovered several pieces of paper near the ditch where the remains of the 3 Alcasser girls were discovered. When they put these bits of paper together, they found it was a card from a local hospital. It was the University Hospital of La Fe, which is situated a few hours northeast of Valencia. This card turned out to be an outpatient leaflet from a year prior. The card belonged to Enrique Angles, who lived in Valencia and had been treated for some sort of sexual illness in 1992. Enrique Angles was not a high priority for authorities, as their attention quickly turned to Enrique's brother, Antonio, and his brother's friend, Miguel, both habitual criminals. Antonio Angles was born in Brazil in 1966. Antonio's father was a chronic alcoholic whose abuse had caused irreversible damage to his family. Antonio, like his father, was aggressive towards his family, with his mother, Nusa, requesting the equivalent of a restraining order against him due to threats he made against her. Antonio was a drug dealer with a history of both violent and non-violent offenses. He'd been imprisoned 5 times, mostly for drug violations, but his most recent arrest included chaining a woman to a pillar and beating her for 25 hours over stolen heroin. Antonio was convicted for this crime, but absconded from prison while on a 6-day pass after being allowed to go home. Antonio was now a fugitive, and a warrant for his arrest was only issued 6 months, in September, after he never returned to prison. 2 months later, in November, the 3 Alcasser girls went missing. After discovering the medical cards, investigators decided to search the Angles family home. While the police were there to serve a search warrant, Miguel Ricart arrived home with 2 of Antonio's brothers. They were all promptly detained and taken to the civil guard barracks for interrogation. Miguel Ricart was born in September 1969 in Valencia, Spain. Miguel's father, like Antonio's, was a rampant, abusive, and domineering alcoholic. Miguel started experimenting with drugs and alcohol at an early age, and after years of drifting in and out of jobs and relationships, Miguel moved in with a longtime friend of his, Antonio, his occasional drug supplier. Miguel would become a small-time criminal, stealing automobiles to support his delinquent lifestyle. During questioning, Miguel informed authorities that he drove a white Opel Corsa, which vaguely matched the description of the vehicle in which the girls had been seen in last. From this point on, the authorities focused on him as the major suspect. Miguel denied seeing Antonio in the months leading up to the interview. He claims that the two men had been friends for almost a decade, but he had no idea where Antonio was and hadn't seen him in quite some time. He did concede that Antonio was an aggressive man who may have had mental disorders that made him a threat to others. Police used contradictions in Miguel's voluntary statements to start piecing together his participation in the crime. They were interested in several of his responses about his whereabouts on the night of the crime. When questioned where he had been on November 13th, Miguel repeatedly said that he had been in prison. Police knew he had spent the most of December in jail for car theft, but there was no record of his being in prison on the Friday the girls went missing. After strenuous questioning, Miguel was read his rights and formally charged as an accomplice to the murders of Miriam Garcia Iborra, Desiree Hernandez Falk, and Tony Gomez Rodriguez. Unfortunately, authorities had little to no evidence to link their suspect to the murder. He happened to own a vehicle similar to the one the girls had got into, and the paper with the name of someone he knew was discovered at the crime scene. That was it. On January 28th, Miguel suddenly admitted to some participation in the crimes. Miguel provided detectives with a general chronology of how he and Antonio Angles kidnapped the girls. Miguel's confession stated that he and Antonio picked up the three girls, and that the girls willingly went along with them. When they arrived in La Romana, Miguel said he had consensual sexual intercourse with Desiree, while Antonio walked out into the night with Miriam and Tony. Miguel then stated that around 20 minutes had gone by before he heard 3 gunshots in the distance. Miguel's confession constantly changed during his interrogations, which he subsequently alleged were forced via torture and abuse by the Spanish Civil Guard. Miguel's confession linked Antonio to the murders of all 3 girls. However, the police had no clue where Antonio was. Police subsequently learned that they nearly apprehended him on January 27th when they went to the Angles house. Antonio was at the family home when they arrested his brother Enrique and Miguel. They theorized that Antonio, who they assumed was living in a bedroom on the 4th story of the building, jumped out the window when the civil guard came to interview his family. In the following weeks, authorities got calls placing Antonio in different locations across the neighborhood. By February 5th, almost a week after Miguel's arrest and confession, authorities said that they had lost track of Antonio. The hunt for Antonio continued, expanding to neighboring countries and placing Antonio on Interpol's radar. Antonio's last sighting in Spain was at Minglanilla, Cuenca, after which he traveled to Lisbon and stowed away aboard the container ship City of Plymouth. He is presumed to have died when he apparently went overboard off the coast of Ireland as a result of hypothermia or drowning. Alternative theories suggest that Angles eluded arrest and is now traveling under his Brazilian passport. Miguel's statements changed many times before his trial began in May 1997. Miguel's defense team claimed there was no physical evidence tying him or Antonio to the murders. During an autopsy done after the girls were found, the forensics team was able to find 15 individual hairs on the girls' bodies. Almost all of them were pubic hairs. 12 of the hairs proved not to come from Miguel or Antonio. Instead, the DNA sequences belonged to several different people, possibly between 5 and 7 men. The remaining 3 hairs were damaged and could not be analyzed. So the defense claimed there was no DNA evidence linking Miguel or Antonio to the crimes, and rightly so. Miguel Ricart was sentenced to 170 years in jail on Friday, September 5, 1997, for kidnapping, raping, and murdering the 3 young girls. However, Antonio was and continues to be regarded the primary perpetrator of the crime, despite the fact that he has not been seen by Spanish officials since March 1992. So, what most likely happened to the Alcasser girls? I thought I'd seen bad police work before, but this takes the cake. Many, including us at Bad Things, feel that Antonio and Miguel were not the only ones involved in the crime. In fact, we're not sure if Miguel was involved at all. False confessions happen frequently under pressure, and even more so during the 90s. Miriam's father, Fernando Garcia, questions the official account of events, calling the 2 men just pawns. Instead, he claimed that his own research revealed proof that the girls had been murdered and tortured by men of high social position. One of the ideas was that the girls had been taken and videotaped for a snuff film. However, there is no evidence to back up the claims. Although these are bold claims, there is DNA evidence that a group of men sexually assaulted and killed the girls. Why has Miguel never mentioned anyone else as an accomplice? Could Fernando Garcia be onto something? Were powerful men involved in the murders? 2 things seem quite clear though. There was most likely multiple perpetrators, and Antonio had something to hide. We think he is definitely the key to solving the whole crime. On November 29, 2013, Miguel Ricart was released from prison after serving just 20 years due to a legal technicality. Miguel has given just one brief interview after his release, during which he said that he was innocent of murdering the 3 young girls and that the prosecution had framed him. He was last seen in Spain's capital, Madrid, trying to buy narcotics. Leave us a comment and tell us who you think killed the Alcasser girls. We would love to hear your opinion. If you love our content and want to support the channel, feel free to check our web shop where you can find exclusive true crime merch, brought to you by Bad Things.